Chapter 9. That spring something unexpected happened, something of importance indeed. Work at the mine was started again. Geisler had sold his land. Inconceivable. Oh, but Geisler was an unfathomable mind. He could make a bargain or refuse, shake his head for a no, or nod the same for yes. Could make the whole village smile again. Conscience had pricked him, maybe. He had no longer the heart to see the district ere he had been lensman famishing on homemade gruel and short of money. Or had he got his $250,000? Possibly, again, Geisler himself had at last begun to feel the need of money, and had been forced to sell for what he could get. 25 or 50,000 was not to be despised, after all. As a matter of fact, there were rumors that it was his eldest son who had settled the business on his father's account. Be that as it might, work was recommenced. The same engineer came again with his gangs of men, and the work went on anew. The same work, aye, but in a different fashion now, going backwards, as it were. All seemed in regular order. The Swedish mine owners had brought their men, and dynamite and money. What could be wrong, anyway? Even Aronson came back again, Aronson the trader, who had set his mind on buying back Storborg from Eliseus. No, said Eliseus. It's not for sale. You'll sell, I suppose, if you're offered enough? No. No, Eliseus was not going to sell Storborg. The truth was, he had changed his mind somewhat as to the position. It was none so bad, after all, to be owner of a trading station in the hills. He had a fine veranda with colored glass windows, and a chief clerk to do all the work, while he himself went about the country traveling. Aye, traveling first class, with fine folks. One day, perhaps, he might be able to go as far as America. He often thought of that. Even these little journeys on business to the towns down in the south were something to live on for a long time after. Not that he let himself go altogether, and chartered a steamer of his own and held wild orgies on the way. Orgies were not in his line. A strange fellow, was Eliseus. He no longer cared about girls, had given up such things altogether, lost all interest in them. No, but after all, he was the Margrave's son, and travelled first class and bought up loads of goods. And each time he came back a little finer than before, a greater man. The last time, he even wore galoshes to keep his feet dry. What's that, you taken to wearing 2 pairs of shoes? They said. I've been suffering from chilblains lately, says Eliseus. And everyone sympathized with Eliseus and his chilblains. Glorious days, a grand life, with no end of leisure. No, he was not going to sell Storborg. What, go back to a little town and stand behind the counter in a little shop, and no chief clerk of his own at all? Moreover, he had made up his mind now to develop the business on a grand scale. The Swedes had come back again and would flood the place with money. He would be a fool to sell out now. Aronson was forced to go back each time with a flat refusal, more and more disgusted at his own lack of foresight in ever having given up the place. Oh, but Aronson might have saved himself a deal of self-reproach, and likewise Eliseus with his plans and intentions, that he might have kept in moderation. And more than all, the village would have done well to be less confident. Instead of going about smiling and rubbing its hands like angels sure of being blessed, no call for them to do so if they had but known. For now came disappointment, and no little one at that. Who would ever have thought it? Work at the mine commenced again, true enough, but at the other end of the field, 8 miles away, on the southern boundary of Geisler's holding, far off in another district altogether. A district with which they were in no way concerned. And from there the work was to make its way gradually northward to the original mine, Isak's mine, to be a blessing to folk in the wilds and in the village. At best, it would take years, any number of years, a generation. The news came like a dynamite charge of the heaviest sort, with shock and stopping of ears. The village folk were overcome with grief. Some blamed Geisler. 'Twas Geisler, that devil of a man, who had tricked them once more. Others huddled together at a meeting and sent out a new deputation of trusty men, this time to the mining company, to the engineer. But nothing came of it. The engineer explained that he was obliged to start work from the south because that was nearest the sea, and saved the need of an aerial railway, reduced the transport almost to nil. No, the work must begin that way, no more to be said. Then it was that Aronson at once rose up and set out for the new workings, the new promised land. He even tried to get Anderson to go with him. "What's the sense of you staying on here in the wilds?" said he. "Much better come with me." But Anderson would not leave. Incomprehensible, but so it was, there was something which held him to the spot, he seemed to thrive there, had taken root. It must be Anderson who had changed, for the place was the same as ever. Folk and things were unaltered, the mining work had turned away to other tracts, but folk in the wilds had not lost their heads over that, they had their land to till, their crops, their cattle. No great wealth in money, true, but in all the necessaries of life, aye, absolutely all. Even Eliseus was not reduced to misery because the stream of gold was flowing elsewhere. The worst of it was that in his first exaltation he had bought great stocks of goods that were now unsaleable. Well, they could stay there for the time being. It looked well, at any rate, to have plenty of wares in a store. No, a man of the wilds did not lose his head. The air was not less healthy now than before. There were folk enough to admire new clothes, there was no need of diamonds. Wine was a thing he knew from the feast at Cana. A man of the wild was not put out by the thought of great things he could not get. Art, newspapers, luxuries, politics, and such like were worth just what folk were willing to pay for them, no more. Growth of the soil was something different, a thing to be procured at any cost, the only source, the origin of all. A dull and desolate existence? Nay, least of all. A man had everything. His powers above, his dreams, his loves, his wealth of superstition. Sivert, walking one evening by the river, stops on a sudden. There on the water are a pair of ducks, male and female. They have sighted him, they are aware of man, and afraid. One of them says something, utters a little sound, a melody in 3 tones, and the other answers with the same. Then they rise, whirl off like 2 little wheels a stone's throw up the river, and settle again. Then, as before, one speaks and the other answers. The same speech as at first, but mark a new delight, it is set 2 octaves higher. Sivert stands looking at the birds, looking past them, far into a dream. A sound had floated through him, a sweetness, and left him standing there with a delicate, thin recollection of something wild and splendid, something he had known before, and forgotten again. He walks home in silence, says no word of it, makes no boast of it, 'twas not for worldly speech. And it was but Sivert from Salanra, went out one evening, young and ordinary as he was, and met with this. It was not the only thing he met with, there were more adventures beside. Another thing which happened was that Jensine left Salanra. And that made Sivert not a little perturbed in his mind. Aye, it came to that, Jensine would leave, if you please, she wished it so. Oh, Jensine was not one of your common sort, none could say that. Sivert had once offered to drive her back home at once, and on that occasion she had cried, which was a pity. But afterward she repented of that, and made it clear that she repented, and gave notice and would leave. Aye, a proper way to do. Nothing could have suited Inger at Salanra better than this. Inger was beginning to grow dissatisfied with her maid. Strange, she had nothing to say against her, but the sight of the girl annoyed her, she could hardly endure to have her about the place. It all arose, no doubt, from Inger's state of mind. She had been heavy and religious all that winter, and it would not pass off. Want to leave, do you? Why, then, well and good, said Inger. It was a blessing, the fulfillment of nightly prayers. 2 grown women they were already, what did they want with this Jensine, fresh as could be and marriageable and all? Inger thought with a certain displeasure of that same marriageableness, thinking, maybe, how she had once been the same herself. Her deep religiousness did not pass off. She was not full of vice. She had tasted, sipped, let us say, but 'twas not her intent to persevere in that way all through her old age, not by any means. Inger turned aside with horror from the thought. The mine and all its workmen were no longer there, and heaven be praised. Virtue was not only tolerable, but inevitable, it was a necessary thing, aye, a necessary good, a special grace. But the world was all awry. Look now, here was Leopoldine, little Leopoldine, a seedling, a slip of a child, going about bursting with sinful health. But an arm round her waist and she would fall helpless, oh, fie. There were spots on her face now, too, a sign in itself of wild blood. Aye, her mother remembered well enough, 'twas the wild blood would out. Inger did not condemn her child for a matter of spots on her face, but it must stop, she would have an end of it. And what did that fellow Anderson want coming up to Salanra of Sundays, to talk fieldwork with Isak? Did the two menfolk imagine the child was blind? Aye, young folk were young folk as they had ever been, 30, 40 years ago, but worse than ever now. Why, that's as it may be, said Isak, when they spoke of the matter. But here's the spring come, and Jensine gone, and who's to manage the summer work? Leopoldine and I can do the haymaking, said Inger. Aye, I'd rather go raking night and day myself, said she bitterly, and on the point of crying. Isak could not understand what there was to make such a fuss about. But he had his own ideas, no doubt, and off he went to the edge of the wood, with crowbar and pick, and fell to working at a stone. Nay, indeed, Isak could not see why Jensine should have left them. A good girl, and a worker. To tell the truth, Isak was often at a loss in all save the simplest things, his work, his lawful and natural doings. A broad-shouldered man, well filled out, nothing astral about him at all, he ate like a man and throve on it, and 'twas rarely he was thrown off his balance in any way. Well, here was this stone. There were stones more in plenty, but here was one to begin with. Isak is looking ahead, to the time when he will need to build a little house here, a little home for himself and Inger, and as well to get to work a bit on the site, and clear it. While Sivert is down at Storborg. Otherwise the boy would be asking questions, and that was not to Isak's mind. The day must come, of course, when Sivert would need all there was of the place for himself, the old folks would be wanting a house apart. Aye, there was never an end of building at Salanra. That fodder loft above the cowshed was not done yet, though the beams and planks for it were there already. Well, then, here was this stone. Nothing so big to look at above ground, but not to be moved at a touch for all that, it must be a heavy fellow. Isak dug round about it, and tried his crowbar, but it would not move. He dug again and tried once more, but no. Back to the house for a spade then, and clear the earth away, then digging again, trying again, no. A mighty heavy beast to shift, thought Isak patiently enough. He dug away now for a steady while, but the stone seemed reaching ever deeper and deeper down, there was no getting a purchase on it. A nuisance it would be if he had to blast it, after all. The boring would make such a noise, and call up everyone on the place. He dug. Off again to fetch a levering pole and tried that, no. He dug again. Isak was beginning to be annoyed with this stone. He frowned, and looked at the thing, as if he had just come along to make a general inspection of the stones in that neighborhood, and found this one particularly stupid. He criticized it. Aye, it was a round-faced, idiotic stone, no getting hold of it any way, he was almost inclined to say it was deformed. Blasting? The thing wasn't worth a charge of powder. And was he to give it up, was he to consider the possibility of being beaten by a stone? He dug. Hard work, that it was, but as to giving up. At last he got the nose of his lever down and tried it, the stone did not move. Technically speaking, there was nothing wrong with his method, but it did not work. What was the matter, then? He had got out stones before in his life. Was he getting old? Funny thing, he. Ridiculous, indeed. True, he had noticed lately that he was not so strong as he had been, that is to say, he had noticed nothing of the sort, never heeded it, 'twas only imagination. And he goes at the stone once more, with the best will in the world. Oh, 'twas no little matter when Isak bore down on a levering pole with all his weight. There he is now, hoisting and hoisting again, a cyclop, enormous, with a torso that seems built in one to the knees. A certain pomp and splendor about him, his equator was astounding. But the stone did not move. No help for it, he must dig again. Try blasting? Not a word. No, dig again. He was intent on his work now. The stone should come up. It would be wrong to say there was anything at all perverse in this on Isak's part, it was the ingrown love of a worker on the soil, but altogether without tenderness. It was a foolish sight. First gathering, as it were, about the stone from all sides, then making a dash at it, then digging all round its sides and fumbling at it, throwing up the earth with his bare hands, so he did. Yet there was nothing of a caress in it all. Warmth, yes, but the warmth of zeal alone. Try the lever again. He thrust it down where there was best hold, no. An altogether remarkable instance of obstinacy and defiance on the part of the stone. But it seemed to be giving. Isak tries again, with a touch of hope. The earth-breaker has a feeling now that the stone is no longer invincible. Then the lever slipped, throwing him to the ground. "Devil," said he. Aye, he said that. His cap had got thrust down over one ear as he fell, making him look like a robber, like a Spaniard. He spat. "Here comes Inger." "Isak, come in and have your food now," says she, kindly and pleasant as can be. "Aye," says he, "but we'll have her no nearer, and wants no questions." Oh, but Inger, never dreaming, she comes nearer. "What's in your mind now?" she asks, to soften him with a hint of the way he thinks out some new grand thing almost every day. But Isak is sullen, terribly sullen and stern. He says, "Nay, I don't know." And Inger again, foolish that she is, keeps on talking and asking and will not go. "Seeing as you've seen it yourself," says he at last, "I'm getting up this stone here." "Ho, going to get him up?" "Aye." "And couldn't I help a bit at all?" she asks. Isak shakes his head. But it was a kindly thought, anyway, that she would have helped him, and he can hardly be harsh in return. "If you just wait the least bit of a while," says he, and runs home for the hammers. If he could only get the stone rough a bit, knocking off a flake or so in the right spot, it would give the lever a better hold. Inger holds the setting hammer, and Isak strikes. Strikes, strikes. Aye, sure enough, off goes a flake. "'Twas a good help," says Isak, "and thanks. But don't trouble about food for me this bit of a while, I must get this stone up first." But Inger does not go. And to tell the truth, Isak is pleased enough to have her there watching him at his work, 'tis a thing has always pleased him, since their young days. And lo, he gets a fine purchase now on the lever, and puts his weight into it, the stone moves. "He's moving," says Inger. "'Tis but your nonsense," says Isak. Nonsense, indeed. But it is. Got so far, then, and that was something. The stone was, so to speak, converted now, was on his side, they were working together. Isak hoists and heaves with his lever, and the stone moves, but no more. He keeps at it a while, nothing more. All at once he understands that it is not merely a question of weight, the dead pull of his body. No, the fact is that he has no longer his old strength, he has lost the tough agility that makes all the difference. Weight? An easy matter enough to hang on with his weight and break an iron-shod pole. No, he was weakening, that was it. And the patient man is filled with bitterness at the thought, at least he might have been spared the shame of having Inger here to see it. Suddenly he drops the lever and grasps the sledge. A fury takes him, he is minded to go at it violently now. And see, his cap still hangs on one ear, robber fashion, and now he steps mightily, threateningly, round the stone, trying, as it were, to set himself in the proper light. Ho, he will leave that stone a ruin and a wreck of what it had been. Why not? When a man is filled with mortal hatred of a stone, it is a mere formality to crush it. And suppose the stone resists, suppose it declines to be crushed? Why, let it try, and see which of the two survives. But then it is that Inger speaks up, a little timidly, again. Seeing, no doubt, what is troubling him, what if we both hang on the stick there? And the thing she calls a stick is the lever, nothing else. No, cries Isak furiously. But after a moment's thought he says, well, well, since you're here, though you might as well have gone home. Let's try. And they get the stone up on edge. Aye, they manage that. And, pooh! Says Isak. But now comes a revelation, a strange thing to see. The underside of the stone is flat, mightily broad, finely cut, smooth and even as a floor. The stone is but the half of a stone, the other half is somewhere close by, no doubt. Isak knows well enough that two halves of the same stone may lie in different places. The frost, no doubt, that in course of time had shifted them apart. But he is all wonder and delight at the find, 'tis a useful stone of the best, a door slab. A round sum of money would not have filled this fieldworker's mind with such content. A fine door slab, says he proudly. And Inger, simple creature, why? Now how on earth could you tell that beforehand? Says Isak. Think I'd go here digging about for nothing? They walk home together, Isak enjoying new admiration on false pretenses. 'Twas something he had not deserved, but it tasted but little different from the real thing. He lets it be understood that he has been looking out for a suitable door slab for a long time, and had found it at last. After that, of course, there could be nothing in the least suspicious about his working there again, he could root about as much as he pleased on pretext of looking for the other half. And when Sivert came home, he could get him to help. But if it had come to this, that he could no longer go out alone and heave up a stone, why, things were sorely changed. Aye, 'twas a bad lookout, and the more need to get that site cleared quick as might be. Age was upon him, he was ripening for the chimney corner. The triumph he had stolen in the matter of the door slab faded away in a few days, 'twas a false thing, and not made to last. Isak stooped a little now in his walk. Had he not once been so much of a man that he grew wakeful and attentive in a moment if one but said a word of stone, a word of digging? And 'twas no long time since, but a few years, no more. Aye, and in those days, folk that were shy of a bit of draining work kept out of his way. Now he was beginning, little by little, to take such matters more calmly, Herregud. All things were changed, the land itself was different now, with broad telegraph roads up through the woods, that had not been there before, and rocks blasted and sundered up by the water. As they had not been before. And folk, too, were changed. They did not greet coming and going as in the old days, but nodded only, or maybe not even that. But then, in the old days there had been no Salanra, but only a turf hut, while now. There had been no Margrave in the old days. Aye, but Margrave, what was he now? A pitiful thing, nothing superhuman, but old and fading, going the way of all flesh. What though he had good bowels, and could eat well, when it gave him no strength? 'Twas Sivert had the strength now, and a mercy it was so, but think, if Isak had had it too. A sorry thing, to find his works running down. He had toiled like a man, carrying loads enough for any beast of burden, now, he could exercise his patience in resting. Isak is ill-pleased, heavy at heart. Here lies an old hat, an old sou'wester, rotting on the ground. Carried there by the gale, maybe, or maybe the lads had brought it there to the edge of the wood years ago, when they were little ones. It lies there year after year, rotting and rotting away. But once it had been a new sou'wester, all yellow and new. Isak remembers the day he came home with it from the store, and Inger had said it was a fine hat. A year or so after, he had taken it to a painter down in the village, and had it blacked and polished, and the brim done in green. And when he came home, Inger thought it a finer hat than before. Inger always thought everything was fine. 'Twas a good life those days, cutting faggots, with Inger to look on, his best days. And when March and April came, Inger and he would be wild after each other, just like the birds and beasts in the woods. And when May was come, he would sow his corn and plant potatoes, living and thriving from day to dawn. Work and sleep, loving and dreaming, he was like the first big ox, and that was a wonder to see, big and bright as a king. But there was no such May to the years now. No such thing. Isak was sorely despondent for some days. Dark days they were. He felt neither wish nor strength to start work on the fodder loft, that could be left for Sivert to do some day. The thing to be done now was the house for himself, the last house to build. He could not long hide from Sivert what he was doing. He was clearing the ground, and plain to see what for. And one day he told. "There's a good bit of stone if we'd any use for stonework," said he. "And there's another." Sivert showed no surprise, and only said, "Aye, first-rate stones." "What you might think," said his father. "We've been digging round here now to find that other doorslab piece, might almost do to build here." "I don't know." "Aye, 'tis no bad place to build," said Sivert, looking round. "Think so?" "'Twas none so bad, maybe, to have a bit of a place to house folk if any should come along." "Aye. A couple of rooms'd be as well. You saw how 'twas when they Swedish gentlemen came, and no proper place to house them. But what you think, a bit of a kitchen as well, maybe, if 'twas any cooking to be done." "Aye, 'twould be a shame to build with never a bit of kitchen," says Sivert. "You think so?" Isak said no more. But Sivert, he was a fine lad to grasp things, and get into his head all at once just what was needed in a place to put up Swedish gentlemen that chanced to come along. Never so much as asked a single question, but only said, "Doing it my way, now, you'd put up a bit of a shed on the north wall. Folks coming along, be useful to have a shed place to hang up wet clothes and things." And his father agrees at once, "Aye, the very thing." They work at their stones again in silence. Then asks Isak, "Eliseus, he's not come home, I suppose?" And Sivert answers evasively, "He'll be coming home soon." 'Twas that way with Eliseus, he was all for staying away, living away on journeys. Couldn't he have ridden for the goods? But he must go round and buy them on the spot. Got them so much cheaper. Aye, maybe, but what about cost of the journey? He had his own way of thinking, it seemed. And then, what did he want, anyway, with more cotton stuff, and colored ribbons for christening caps, and black and white straw hats, and long tobacco pipes? No one ever bought such things up in the hills, and the village folk, they only came up to Storborg when they'd no money. Eliseus was clever enough in his way, only to see him write on a paper, or do sums with a bit of chalk. "Aye, with a head like yours," said folk, admiring him. And that was true enough. But he was spending overmuch. They village folk never paid their owings, and yet even a fellow like Brede Olsen could come up to Storborg that winter and get cotton print and coffee and molasses and paraffin on credit. Isak has laid out a deal of money already for Eliseus, and his store and his long journeyings about. There's not overmuch left now out of the riches from the mine, and what then? "How'd you think he's getting on, Eliseus?" asks Isak suddenly. "Getting on," says Sivert, "to gain time. Doesn't seem to be doing so well." He says it'll go all right." "You spoken to him about it?" "Nay, but Andresen he says so." Isak thought over this, and shook his head. "Nay, I doubt it's going ill," says he. "'Tis a pity for the lad." And Isak gloomier than ever now, for all he'd been none too bright before. But then Sivert flashes out a bit of news: there's more folk coming to live now. How'd you say? 2 new holdings. They've bought up close by us. Isak stands still with his crowbar in hand. This was news, and good news, the best that could be. That makes 10 of us here, says he. And Isak learns exactly where the new men have bought. He knows the country all round in his head, and nods. Aye, they've done well there. Wood for firing in plenty, and some big timber here and there. Ground slopes down so west. Aye. Settlers, nothing could beat them, anyway. Here were new folk coming to live. The mine had come to nothing, but so much the better for the land. A desert, a dying place? Far from it, all about was swarming with life. 2 new men, 4 new hands to work, fields and meadows and homes. Oh, the little green tracks in a forest, a hut and water, children and cattle about. Corn waving on the moorlands where naught but horsetail grew before, bluebells nodding on the fells, and yellow sunlight blazing in the ladysliper flowers outside a house. And human beings living there, move and talk and think and are there with heaven and earth. Here stands the first of them all, the first man in the wilds. He came that way, knee-deep in marsh growth and heather, found a sunny slope and settled there. Others came after him, they trod a path across the waste almaning. Others again, and the path became a road, carts drove there now. Isak may be content, may start with a little thrill of pride. He was the founder of a district, the pioneer. Look here, we can't go wasting time on this bit of a house place if we're to get that fodder loft done this year, says he. With a new brightness, new spirit, as it were, new courage and life. Chapter 10. A woman tramping up along the road. A steady summer rain falls, wetting her, but she does not heed it. Other things are in her mind, anxiety. Barbro it is, and no other, Breed's girl, Barbro. Anxious, not knowing how the venture will end, she has gone from service at the lensman's, and left the village. That is the matter. She keeps away from all the farms on the road up, unwilling to meet with folk, easy to see where she was going, with a bundle of clothing on her back. Going to mainland, to take service there again. 10 months she has been at the lensman's now, and 'tis no little time, reckoned out in days and nights, but an eternity reckoned in longing and oppression. It had been bearable at first, Fru Heyerdahl looking after her kindly, giving her aprons and neat things to wear. 'Twas a joy to be sent on errands to the store with such fine clothes to wear. Barbro had been in the village as a child. She knew all the village folk from the days when she had played there, gone to school there, kissed the lads there, and joined in many games with stones and shells. Bearable enough for a month or so. But then Fru Heyerdahl had begun to be even more careful about her, and when the Christmas festivities began, she was strict. And what good could ever come of that? It was bound to spoil things. Barbro could never have endured it but that she had certain hours of the night to herself. From 2 to 6 in the morning she was more or less safe, and had stolen pleasures not a few. What about cook, then, for not reporting her? A nice sort of woman she must be. Oh, an ordinary woman enough, as the world finds them. Cook went out without leave herself. They took it in turns. And it was quite a long time before they were found out. Barbro was by no means so depraved that it showed in her face. Impossible to accuse her of immorality. Immorality? She made all the resistance one could expect. When young men asked her to go to a Christmas dance, she said no once, said no twice, but the third time she would say, "I'll try and come from 2 to 6. Just as a decent woman should, not trying to make herself out worse than she is, and making a display of daring. She was a servant girl, serving all her time, and knew no other recreation than fooling with men. It was all she asked for. Fru Heyerdahl came and lectured her, lent her books, and a fool for her pains. Barbro had lived in Bergen and read the papers and been to the theatre. She was no innocent lamb from the countryside. But Fru Heyerdahl must have grown suspicious at last. One day she comes up at 3 in the morning to the maid's room and calls, "Barbro." "Yes," answers cook. "It's Barbro I want." "Isn't she there?" "Open the door." Cook opens the door and explains as agreed upon, that Barbro had had to run home for a minute about something. Home for a minute at this time of night? Fru Heyerdahl has a good deal to say about that. And in the morning there is a scene. Breed is sent for, and Fru Heyerdahl asks, "Was Barbro at home with you last night, at 3 o'clock?" Breed is unprepared, but answers, 3 o'clock? Yes, quite right. We sat up late, there was something we had to talk about, says Breed. The lensman's lady then solemnly declares that Barbro shall go out no more at nights. No, says Breed. Not as long as she's in this house. No, there, you can see, Barbro, I told you so, says her father. You can go and see your parents now and then during the day, says her mistress. But Fru Heyerdahl was wide awake enough, and her suspicion was not gone. She waited a week, and tried at 4 in the morning. "Barbro," she called. Oh, but this time, 'twas cook's turn out, and Barbro was at home. The maid's room was a nest of innocence. Her mistress had to hit on something in a hurry. "Did you take in the washing last night?" "Yes." "That's a good thing, it's blowing so hard. Good night." But it was not so pleasant for Fru Heyerdahl to get her husband to wake her in the middle of the night and go padding across herself to the servants' room to see if they were at home. They could do as they pleased, she would trouble herself no more. And if it had not been for sheer ill luck, Barbro might have stayed the year out in her place that way. But a few days ago the trouble had come. It was in the kitchen, early one morning. Barbro had been having some words with cook, and no light words either. They raised their voices, forgetting all about their mistress. Cook was a mean thing and a cheat. She had sneaked off last night out of her turn because it was Sunday. And what excuse had she to give? Going to say goodbye to her favorite sister that was off to America? Not a bit of it. Cook had made no excuse at all, but simply said that Sunday night was one had been owing to her for a long time. "Oh, you've not an atom of truth nor decency in your body," said Barbro. And there was the mistress in the doorway. She had come out, perhaps, with no more thought than that the girls were making too much noise, but now she stood looking, very closely at Barbro's apron over her breast. Aye, leaning forward and looking very closely indeed. It was a painful moment. And suddenly Fru Heyerdahl screams and draws back to the door. What on earth can it be? Thinks Barbro, and looks down at herself. Herregud. A flea, nothing more. Barbro cannot help smiling, and being not unused to acting under critical circumstances, she flicks off the flea at once. "On the floor," cried Fru Heyerdahl. "Are you mad, girl? Pick it up at once." Barbro begins looking about for it, and once more acts with presence of mind. She makes as if she had caught the creature, and drops it realistically into the fire. "Where did you get it?" asks her mistress angrily. "Where I got it? Yes, that's what I want to know." But here Barbro makes a bad mistake. At the store, she ought to have said, of course, that would have been quite enough. As it was, she did not know where she had got the creature, but had an idea it must have been from cook. Cook at the height of passion at once, "From me. You'll please to keep your fleas to yourself, so there. Anyway, 'twas you was out last night." Another mistake, she should have said nothing about it. Cook has no longer any reason for keeping silence, and now she let out the whole thing, and told all about the nights Barbro had been out. Fru Heyerdahl mightily indignant, she cares nothing about cook, 'tis Barbro she is after, the girl whose character she has answered for. And even then all might have been well if Barbro had bowed her head like a reed, and been cast down with shame, and promised all manner of things for the future, but no. Her mistress is forced to remind her of all she has done for her, and at that, if you please, Barbro falls to answering back, so foolish was she, saying impertinent things. Or perhaps she was cleverer than might seem, trying on purpose, maybe, to bring the matter to a head, and get out of the place altogether? Says her mistress. After I've saved you from the clutches of the law. As for that, answers Barbro, I'd have just as pleased if you hadn't. And that's all the thanks I get, says her mistress. Least said the better, perhaps, says Barbro. I wouldn't have got more than a month or two, anyway, and done with it. Fru Heyerdahl is speechless for a moment. For a little while she stands saying nothing, only opening and closing her mouth. The first thing she says is to tell the girl to go. She will have no more of her. Just as you please, says Barbro. For some days after that Barbro had been at home with her parents. But she could not go on staying there. True, her mother sold coffee, and there came a deal of folk to the house. But Barbro could not live on that, and maybe she had other reasons of her own for wanting to get into a settled position again. And so today she had taken a sack of clothes on her back, and started up along the road over the moors. Question now, whether Axel Strom would take her? But she had had the banns put up, anyway, the Sunday before. Raining, and dirty underfoot, but Barbro tramps on. Evening is drawing on, but not dark yet at that season of the year. Poor Barbro, she does not spare herself, but goes on her errand like another. She is bound for a place, to commence another struggle there. She has never spared herself, to tell the truth, never been of a lazy sort, and that is why she has her neat figure now in pretty shape. Barbro is quick to learn things, and often to her own undoing. What else could one expect? She had learned to save herself at a pinch, to slip from one scrape to another, but keeping all along some better qualities. A child's death is nothing to her, but she can still give sweets to a child alive. Then she has a fine musical ear, can strum softly and correctly on a guitar, singing hoarsely the while. Pleasant and slightly mournful to hear. Spared herself? No, so little, indeed, that she has thrown herself away altogether, and felt no loss. Now and again she cries, and breaks her heart over this or that in her life, but that is only natural. It goes with the songs she sings, 'tis the poetry and friendly sweetness in her. She had fooled herself and many another with the same. Had she been able to bring the guitar with her this evening she could have strummed a little for Axel when she came. She manages so as to arrive late in the evening, all is quiet at mainland when she reaches there. See, Axel has already begun haymaking, the grass is cut near the house, and some of the hay already in. And then she reckons out that Oline, being old, will be sleeping in the little room, and Axel lying out in the hayshed, just as she herself had done. She goes to the door she knows so well, breathless as a thief, and calls softly, Axel. What's that? Asks Axel all at once. Nay, 'tis only me, says Barbro, and steps in. You couldn't house me for the night, she says. Axel looks at her and is slow to think, and sits there in his underclothes, looking at her. So, 'tis you, says he. And where'll you be going? Why, depends first of all if you've need of help to the summer work, says she. Axel thinks over that, and says, aren't you going to stay where you were, then? Nay. I've finished at the lensman's. I might be needing help, true enough, for the summer, said Axel. But what's it mean, anyway, you wanting to come back? Nay, never mind me, says Barbro, putting it off. I'll go on again tomorrow. Go to Salanra and cross the hills. I've a place there. You've fixed up with someone there? I might be needing summer help myself, says Axel again. Barbro is wet through, she has other clothes in her sack, and must change. Don't mind about me, says Axel, and moves a bit toward the door, no more. Barbro takes off her wet clothes, they talking the while, and Axel turning his head pretty often towards her. Now you'd better go out just a bit, says she. Out, says he. And indeed, 'twas no weather to go out in. He stands there, seeing her more and more stripped, 'tis hard to keep his eyes away. And Barbro is so thoughtless, she might well have put on dry things bit by bit as she took off the wet, but no. Her shift is thin and clings to her. She unfastens a button at one shoulder, and turns aside, 'tis nothing new for her. Axel dead silent then, and he sees how she makes but a touch or two with her hands and washes the last of her clothes from her. 'Twas splendidly done, to his mind. And there she stands, so utterly thoughtless of her. A while after, they lay talking together. He had need of help for the summer, no doubt about that. They said something that way, says Barbro. He had begun his mowing and haymaking all alone again. Barbro could judge for herself how awkward it was for him now. Barbro understood. On the other hand, it was Barbro herself that had run away and left him before, without a soul to help him, he can't forget that. And taken her rings with her into the bargain. And on top of all that, shameful as it was, the paper that kept on coming, that Bergen newspaper it seemed he would never get rid of, he had to go on paying for it a whole year after. 'Twas shameful mean of them, says Barbro, taking his part all the time. But seeing her all submissive and gentle, Axel himself could not be altogether heartless towards her. He agreed that Barbro might have some reason to be angry with him in return for the way he had taken the telegraph business from her father. But as for that, said he, your father can have the telegraph business again for me, I'll have no more of it, 'tis but a waste of time. Says Barbro. Axel thought for a while, then asked straight out, well, what about it now, would you want to come for the summer and no more? Nay, says Barbro, let it be as you please. You mean that, and truly? Just as you please, and I'll be pleased with the same. You've no call to doubt about me any more. No, 'tis true. And I've ordered about the banns. This was not so bad. Axel lay thinking it over a long time. If she meant it in earnest this time, and not shameful deceit again, then he'd a woman of his own and help for as long as might be. I could get a woman to come from our parts, said he, and she's written saying she'd come. But then I'd have to pay her fare from America. Says Barbro, she's in America, then? Went over last year, she did, but doesn't care to stay. Never mind about her, says Barbro. And what'd become of me then, says she, and begins to be soft and mournful. No. That's why I've not fixed up all certain with her. And after that, Barbro must have something to show in return. She confessed about how she could have taken a lad in Bergen, and he was a carter in a big brewery, a mighty big concern, and a good position. And he'll be sorrowing for me now, I doubt, says Barbro, and makes a little sob. But you know how 'tis, Axel. When there's two been so much together as you and 'tis more than I could ever forget. And you can forget me as much as you please. What? Me, says Axel. Nay, no need to lie there crying for that, my girl, for I've never forgot you. Well. Barbro feels a deal better after that confession, and says, anyway, paying her fare all the way from America when there's no need. She advises him to have nothing to do with that business, 'twould be over costly, and there was no need. Barbro seemed resolved to build up his happiness herself. They came to agreement all round in the course of the night. 'Twas not as if they were strangers, they had talked over everything before. Even the necessary marriage ceremony was to take place before St. Olaf's Day and harvest, they had no need to hide things, and Barbro was now herself most eager to get it done at once. Axel was not any put out at her eagerness, and it did not make him any way suspicious, far from it, he was flattered and encouraged to find her so. He was a worker in the fields, no doubt, a thick-skinned fellow, not used to looking over fine at things, nothing delicate beyond measure. There were things he was obliged to do, and he looked to what was useful first of all. Moreover, here was Barbro all new and pretty again, and nice to him, almost sweeter than before. Like an apple she was, and he bit at it. The banns were already put up. As to the dead child and the trial, neither said a word of that. But they did speak of Oline, of how they were to get rid of her. "Aye, she must go," said Barbro. "We've nothing to thank her for, anyway. She's naught but tale-bearing and malice." But it proved no easy matter to get Oline to go. The very first morning, when Barbro appeared, Oline was clear, no doubt, as to her fate. She was troubled at once, but tried not to show it, and brought out a chair. They had managed up to then at mainland. Axel had carried water and wood and done the heaviest work, and Oline doing the rest. And gradually she had come to reckon on staying the rest of her life on the place. Now came Barbro and upset it all. "If we'd only a grain of coffee in the house you should have it," said she to Barbro. "Going farther up, maybe?" "No," said Barbro. "Ho! Not going farther?" "No." "Why, 'tis no business of mine." "No," says Oline. "Going down again, maybe?" "No. Nor going down again. I'm staying here for now." "Staying here, are you?" "Aye, staying here, I doubt." Oline waits for a moment, using her old head, full of policy. "Aye, well," says she. "'Twill save me, then, no doubt. And glad I'll be for the same." "Oh ho," says Barbro in jest, "has Axel here been so hard on you this while?" "Hard on me? Axel? Oh, there's no call to turn an old body's words, there's naught but living on and waiting for the blessed end. Axel that's been as a father and a messenger from the highest to me day and hour together, and gospel truth the same. But seeing I've none of my own folks here, and living alone and rejected under a stranger's roof, with all my kin over across the hills." But for all that, Oline stayed on. They could not get rid of her till after they were wed, and Oline made a deal of reluctance, but said yes at last, and would stay so long to please them, and look to house and cattle while they went down to the church. It took 2 days. But when they came back wedded and all, Oline stayed on as before. She put off going. One day she was feeling poorly, she said, the next it looked like rain. She made up to Barbro with smooth words about the food. Oh, there was a mighty difference in the food now at mainland, 'twas different living now, and a mighty difference in the coffee now. Oh, she stopped at nothing, that Oline, asked Barbro's advice on things she knew better herself. "What you think now, should I milk cows as they stand in their place and order, or should I take cow bordelin first?" "You can do as you please." "Aye, 'tis as I always said," exclaims Oline. "You've been out in the world and lived among great folks and fine folks, and learned all and everything. 'Tis different with the likes of me." Aye, Oline stopped at nothing, she was intriguing all day long. Sitting there telling Barbro how she herself was friends and on the best of terms with Barbro's father, with Brede Olsen. Ho, many a pleasant hour they'd had together, and a kindly man and rich and grand to boot was Brede, and never a hard word in his mouth. But this could not go on forever. Neither Axel nor Barbro cared to have Oline there any longer, and Barbro had taken over all her work. Oline made no complaint, but she flashed dangerous glances at her young mistress and changed her tone ever so little. "Aye, great folk, 'tis true. Axel, he was in town a while last harvest time, you didn't meet him there, maybe?" "Nay, that's true, you were in Bergen that time. But he went into town, he did. 'Twas all to buy a mowing machine and a harrow machine. And what's folk at Salanra now beside you here? Nothing to compare." She was beginning to shoot out little pinpricks, but even that did not help her now, neither of them feared her. Axel told her straight out one day that she must go. "Go?" says Oline. "And how? Crawling, belike?" No, she would not go, saying by way of excuse that she was poorly, and could not move her legs. And to make things bad as could be, when once they had taken the work off her hands, and she had nothing to do at all, she collapsed, and was thoroughly ill. She kept about for a week in spite of it, Axel looking furiously at her. But she stayed on from sheer malice, and at last she had to take to her bed. And now she lay there, not in the least awaiting her blessed end, but counting the hours till she should be up and about again. She asked for a doctor, a piece of extravagance unheard of in the wilds. "Doctor?" said Axel. "Are you out of your senses?" "How d'you mean, then?" said Oline quite gently, as to something she could not understand. Aye, so gentle and smooth-tongued was she, so glad to think she need not be a burden to others, she could pay for the doctor herself. "Ho, can you?" said Axel. "Why, and couldn't I, then?" says Oline. "And, anyway, you'd not have me lie here and die like a dumb beast in the face of the Lord?" Here Barbro put in a word, and was unwise enough to say, "Well, what you've got to complain of, I'd like to know, when I bring you in your meals and all myself. As for coffee, I've said you're better without it, and meaning well." "Is that Barbro?" says Oline, turning just her eyes and no more to look for her. "Aye, she is poorly is Oline, and a pitiful sight with her eyes screwed round cornerways. Aye, maybe 'tis as you say, Barbro, if a tiny drop of coffee do me any harm, a spoonful and no more. If 'twas me in your stead, I'd be thinking of other things than coffee at this hour," says Barbro. "Aye, 'tis as I say," answers Oline. "'Twas never your way to wish and desire a fellow creature's end, but rather they should be converted and live." "What? Aye, I'm lying here and seeing things." "Is it with child you are now, Barbro?" "What's that you say?" cries Barbro furiously. And goes on again, "Oh, 'twould serve you right if I took and heaved you out on the muck heap for your wicked tongue." And at that the invalid was silent for one thoughtful moment, her mouth trembling as if trying so hard to smile, but dare not. "I heard a someone calling last night," says she. "She's out of her senses," says Axel, whispering. "Nay, out of my senses that I'm not." Like someone calling it was. From the woods, or maybe from the stream up yonder. Strange to hear, as it might be a bit of a child crying out. Was that Barbro went out? "Aye," says Axel. "Sick of your nonsense, and no wonder." "Nonsense, you call it, and out of my senses, and all?" "Ah, but not so far as you'd like to think," says Oline. "Nay, 'tis not the Almighty's will and decree I should come before the throne and before the Lamb as yet, with all I know of goings on here at mainland. I'll be up and about again, never fear. But you'd better be fetching a doctor, Axel, 'tis quicker that way. What about that cow you were going to give me?" "Cow? What cow?" "That cow you promised me. Was it Bordelin, maybe?" "You're talking wild," says Axel. "You know how you promised me a cow the day I saved your life." "Nay, that I never knew." At that Oline lifts up her head and looks at him. Grey and bald she is, a head standing up on a long, scraggy neck, ugly as a witch, as an ogress out of a story. And Axel starts at the sight, and fumbles with a hand behind his back for the latch of the door. "Ho," says Oline, "so you're that sort." "Aye, well, say no more of it now. I can live without the cow from this day forth, and never a word I'll say nor breathe of it again. But well that you've shown what sort and manner of man you are this day, I know it now. Aye, and I'll know it another time. But Oline, she died that night, some time in the night, anyway, she was cold next morning when they came in. Oline, an aged creature. Born and died. 'Twas no sorrow to Axel nor Barbro to bury her, and be quit of her forever, there was less to be on their guard against now, they could be at rest. Barbro is having trouble with her teeth again, save for that, all is well. But that everlasting woolen muffler over her face, and shifting it aside every time there's a word to say, 'twas plaguey and troublesome enough. And all this toothache is something of a mystery to Axel. He has noticed, certainly, that she chews her food in a careful sort of way, but there's not a tooth missing in her head. "Didn't you get new teeth?" he asks. "Aye, so I did." "And are they aching?" too? Ah, you with your nonsense, says Barbro irritably, for all that Axel has asked innocently enough. And in her bitterness she lets out what is the matter. You can see how 'tis with me, surely. How 'twas with her. Axel looks closer, and fancies she is stouter than need be. Why, you can't be, 'tis surely not another child again, says he. Why, you know it is, says she. Axel stares foolishly at her. Slow of thought as he is, he sits there counting for a bit, 1 week, 2 weeks, getting on the 3rd week. Nay, how I should know, says he. But Barbro is losing all patience with this debate, and bursts out, crying aloud, crying like a deeply injured creature, nay, you can take and bury me, too, in the ground. And then you'll be rid of me. Strange, what odd things a woman can find to cry for. Axel had never a thought of burying her in the ground. He is a thick-skinned fellow, looking mainly to what is useful. A pathway carpeted with flowers is beyond his needs. Then you'll not be fit to work in the fields this summer, says he. Not work, says Barbro, all terrified again. And then, strange what odd things a woman can find to smile for. Axel, taking it that way, sent a flow of hysterical joy through Barbro, and she burst out, I'll work for 2. Oh, you wait and see, Axel, I'll do all you set me to, and more beyond. Wear myself to the bone, I will, and be thankful, if only you'll put up with me so. More tears and smiles and tenderness after that. Only the 2 of them in the wilds, none to disturb them, open doors and a humming of flies in the summer heat. All so tender and willing was Barbro. He might do as he pleased with her, and she was willing. After sunset he stands harnessing up to the mowing machine, there's a bit he can still get done ready for tomorrow. Barbro comes hurrying out, as if she's something important, and says, Axel, however could you think of getting one home from America? She couldn't get here before winter, and what use of her then? And that was something had just come into her head, and she must come running out with it as if 'twas something needful. But 'twas no way needful. Axel had seen from the first that taking Barbro would mean getting help for all the year. No swaying and swinging with Axel, no thinking with his head among the stars. Now he's a woman of his own to look after the place, he can keep on the telegraph business for a bit. 'Tis a deal of money in the year, and good to reckon with as long as he's barely enough for his needs from the land, and little to sell. All sound and working well, all good reality. And little to fear from Breed about the telegraph line, seeing he's son-in-law to Breed now. Things are looking well, looking grand with Axel now. Chapter 11. And time goes on, winter is past, spring comes again. Isak has to go down to the village one day, and why not? What for? Nay, I don't know, says he. But he gets the cart cleaned up all fine, puts in the seat, and drives off, and a deal of victuals and such put in, too, and why not? 'Twas for Eliseus at Storborg. Never a horse went out from Salanra but there was something taken down to Eliseus. When Isak came driving down over the moors, 'twas no little event, for he came but rarely, Sivert going most ways in his stead. At the 2 farms nearest down, folk stand at the door of the huts and tell one another, 'tis Isak himself, and what'll he be going down after today? And, coming down as far as to mainland, there's Barbro at the glass window with a child in her arms, and sees him, and says, 'tis Isak himself. He comes to Storborg and pulls up. Tro. Is Eliseus at home? Eliseus comes out. He's at home, not gone yet, but just going, off on his spring tour of the towns down south. Here's some things your mother sent down, says his father. Don't know what it is, but nothing much, I doubt. Eliseus takes the things, and thanks him, and asks. There wasn't a letter, I suppose, or anything that sort? Says his father, feeling in pockets, there was. 'Tis from little Rebecca I think they said. Eliseus takes the letter, 'tis that he has been waiting for. feels it all nice and thick, and says to his father, "Well, 'twas lucky you came in time, though 'tis 2 days before I'm off yet. If you'd like to stay a bit, you might take my trunk down." Isak gets down and ties up his horse, and goes for a stroll over the ground. Little Andresen is no bad worker on the land in Elisia's service. True, he has had Sivert from Salanra with horses, but he has done a deal of work on his own account, draining bogs, and hiring a man himself to set the ditches with stone. No need of buying fodder at Storborg that year, and next, like as not, Elisias would be keeping a horse of his own. Thanks to Andresen and the way he worked on the land. After a bit of a while, Elisias calls down that he's ready with his trunk. Ready to go himself, too, by the look of it, in a fine blue suit, white collar, galoshes, and a walking stick. True, he will have 2 days to wait for the boat, but no matter, he may just as well stay down in the village, 'tis all the same if he's here or there. And father and son drive off. Andresen watches them from the door of the shop and wishes a pleasant journey. Isak is all thought for his boy, and would give him the seat to himself. But Elisias will have none of that, and sits up by his side. They come to Breidablik, and suddenly Elisias has forgotten something. "Tro, what is it?" asks his father. "Oh, his umbrella." Elisias has forgotten his umbrella, but he can't explain all about it, and only says, "Never mind, drive on. Don't you want to turn back?" "No, drive on." But a nuisance it was. How on earth had he come to leave it? 'Twas all in a hurry, through his father being there waiting. Well, now he had better buy a new umbrella at Trondheim when he got there. 'Twas no importance either way if he had one umbrella or two. But for all that, Elisias is out of humor with himself, so much so that he jumps down and walks behind. They could hardly talk much on the way down after that, seeing Isak had to turn round every time and speak over his shoulder. Says Isak, "How long you're going to be away?" And Elisias answers, "Oh, say 3 weeks, perhaps, or a month at the outside." His father marvels how folk don't get lost in the big towns, and never find their way back. But Elisias answers, as to that, he's used to living in towns, and never got lost, never had done in his life. Isak thinks it a shame to be sitting up there all alone, and calls out, "Here, you come and drive a bit, I'm getting tired." Elisias won't hear of his father getting down, and gets up beside him again. But first they must have something to eat, out of Isak's well-filled pack. Then they drive on again. They come to the 2 holdings farthest down, easy to see they are nearing the village now. Both the houses have white curtains in the little window facing toward the road, and a flagpole stuck up on top of the hayloft for Constitution Day. "'Tis Isak himself," said folk on the 2 new farms as the cart went by. At last Elisias gives over thinking of his own affairs and his own precious self enough to ask, "What you driving down for today?" Says his father. "'Twas nothing much today." But then, after all, Elisias was going away, no harm, perhaps, in telling him. "'Tis blacksmith's girl, Jensine, I'm going down for," says his father. "Aye," he admits so much. "And you're going down yourself for that?" "Couldn't Sivert have gone?" says Elisias. Aye, Elisias knew no better, nothing better than to think Sivert would go down to the smith's to fetch Jensine, after she had thought so much of herself as to leave Salanra. No, 'twas all awry with the haymaking the year before. Inger had put in all she could, as she had promised. Leopoldine did her share too, not to speak of having a machine for a horse to rake. But the hay was much of it heavy stuff, and the fields were big. Salanra was a sizable place now, and the women had other things to look to besides making hay. All the cattle to look to, and meals to be got, and all in proper time, butter and cheese to make, and clothes to wash, and baking of bread, mother and daughter working all they could. Isak was not going to have another summer like that. He decided without any fuss that Jensine should come back again if she could be got. Inger, too, had no longer a word against it. She had come to her senses again, and said, "Do as you think best." Inger was grown reasonable now. 'Tis no little thing to come to one's senses again after a spell. Inger was no longer full of heat that must out, no longer full of wild blood to be kept in check. The winter had cooled her, nothing beyond the needful warmth in her now. She was getting stouter, growing fine and stately. A wonderful woman to keep from fading, keep from dying off by degrees, like enough because she had bloomed so late in life. Who can say how things come about? Nothing comes from a single cause, but from many. Was Inger not in the best repute with the smith's wife? What could any smith's wife say against her? With her disfigurement, she had been cheated of her spring, and later, had been set in artificial air to lose 6 years of her summer. With life still in her, what wonder her autumn gave an errant growth? Inger was better than blacksmiths' wives, a little damaged, a little warped, but good by nature, clever by nature. Father and son drive down, they come to Brede Olsen's lodging house and set the horse in a shed. It is evening now. They go in themselves. Brede Olsen has rented the house. An outbuilding it had been, belonging to the storekeeper, but done up now with 2 sitting rooms and 2 bedrooms, none so bad, and in a good situation. The place is well frequented by coffee drinkers and folk from round about the village going by the boat. Brede seems to have been in luck for once, found something suited to him, and he may thank his wife for that. 'Twas Brede's wife had hit on the idea of a coffee shop and lodging house, the day she sat selling coffee at the auction at Breidablik. 'Twas a pleasant enough thing to be selling something, to feel money in her fingers, ready cash. Since they had come down here they had managed nicely, selling coffee in earnest now, and housing a deal of folk with nowhere else to lay their heads. A blessing to travelers, is Brede's wife. She has a good helper, of course, in Katrine, her daughter, a big girl now and clever at waiting, though that is only for the time, of course. Not long before little Katrine must have something better than waiting on folk in her parents' house. But for the present, they are making money fairly well, and that is the main thing. The start had been decidedly favorable, and might have been better if the storekeeper had not run short of cakes and sweet biscuits to serve with the coffee. Here were all the feast day folk calling for cakes with their coffee, biscuits and cakes. 'Twas a lesson to the storekeeper to lay in a good supply another time. The family, and Brede himself, live as best they can on their takings. A good many meals are nothing but coffee and stale cakes left over, but it keeps them alive, and gives the children a delicate, sort of refined appearance. 'Tis not everyone has cakes with their coffee, say the village folk. Bredes are doing well, it seems. They even manage to keep a dog, that goes round begging among the customers and gets bits here and there and grows fat on it. A good fat dog about the place is a mighty fine advertisement for a lodging house, it speaks for good feeding anywhere. Brede, then, is husband and father in the house, and apart from that position, has got on variously beside. He had been once more installed as Lensmann's assistant and deputy, and had a good deal to do that way for a time. Unfortunately, his daughter Barbro had fallen out with the Lensmann's wife last autumn, about a trifling matter, a mere nothing, indeed, to tell the truth, a flea. And Brede himself is somewhat in disfavor there since. But Brede counts it no great loss. After all, there are other families that find work for him now on purpose to annoy the Lensmanns. He is frequently called upon, for instance, to drive for the doctor, and as for the parsonage, they'd gladly send for Brede every time there's a pig to be killed, and more. Brede says so himself. But for all that there are hard times now and again in Brede's house, 'tis not all the family are as fat and flourishing as the dog. Still, heaven be praised, Brede is not a man to take things much to heart. Here's the children growing up day by day, says he, though, for that matter, there's always new little ones coming to take their place. The ones that are grown up and out in the world can keep themselves, and send home a bit now and again. There's Barbro married at Mainland, and Helga out at the herring fishery. They send home something in money or money's worth as often as they can. Even Katrine, doing waiting at home, managed, strangely enough, to slip a 5-krone note into her father's hand last winter, when things were looking extra bad. "There's a girl for you," said Breed, and never asked her where she'd got the money, or what for. That was the way. Children with a heart to think of their parents and help them in time of need. Breed is not altogether pleased with his boy Helga in that respect. He can be heard at times standing in the store with a little group about him, developing his theories as to children and their duty toward their parents. "Look you, now, my boy, Helga. If he smokes tobacco a bit, or takes a dram now and then, I've nothing against that, we've all been young in our time. But 'tis not right of him to go sending one letter home after another and nothing but words and wishes in. 'Tis not right to set his mother crying. 'Tis the wrong road for a lad. In days gone by, things were different. Children were no sooner grown than they went into service and started sending home a little to help. And quite right, too. Isn't it their father and mother had borne them under their breast first of all, and sweating blood to keep the life in them all their tender years? And then to forget it all. It almost seemed as if Helga had heard that speech of his father's, for there came a letter from him after with money in, 50 kroner, no less. And then Breeds had a great time. In their endless extravagance they bought both meat and fish for dinner, and a lamp all hung about with lustres to hang from the ceiling in the best room. They managed somehow, and what more could they ask? Breeds, they kept alive, lived from hand to mouth, but without great fear. What more could they wish for? "Here's visitors indeed," says Breed, showing Isak and Eliseus into the room with the new lamp. "And I'd never thought to see. Isak, you're never going away yourself, and all?" "Nay, only to the smith's for something, 'tis no more." "Ho! 'Tis Eliseus, then, going off south again?" Eliseus is used to hotels. He makes himself at home, hangs up his coat and stick on the wall, and calls for coffee. As for something to eat, his father has things in a basket. Katrine brings the coffee. "Pay? I'll not hear of it," says Breed. "I've had many a bite and sup at Salanra, and as for Eliseus, I'm in his books already. Don't take it, Katrine." But Eliseus pays all the same, takes out his purse and pays out the money, and 20 or over, no nonsense about him. Isak goes across to the smith's, and Eliseus stays where he is. He says a few words, as in duty bound, to Katrine, but no more than is needed. He would rather talk to her father. No, Eliseus cares nothing for women. Has been frightened off by them once, as it were, and takes no interest in them now. Like as not he'd never much inclination that way to speak of, seeing he's so completely out of it all now. A strange man to live in the wilds, a gentleman with thin writer's hands, and the sense of a woman for finery, for sticks and umbrellas and galoshes. Frightened off, and changed, incomprehensibly not a marrying man. Even his upper lip declines to put forth any brutal degree of growth. Yet it might be the lad had started well enough, come of good stock, but been turned thereafter into an artificial atmosphere, and warped, transformed? Had he worked so hard in an office, in a shop, that his whole originality was lost thereby? Maybe, 'twas so. Anyway, here he is now, easy and passionless, a little weak, a little heedless, wandering farther and farther off the road. He might envy every soul among his fellows in the wilds, but has not even strength for that. Katrine is used to jesting with her customers, and asks him teasingly if he is off to see his sweetheart in the south again. "I've other things to think of," says Eliseus. "I'm out on business, opening up connections." "No call to be so free with your betters, Katrine," says her father reprovingly. Oh, Breed Olsen is all respect towards Eliseus, mighty respectful for him to be. And well he may, 'tis but wise of him, seeing he owes money up at Storborg, and here's his creditor before him. And Eliseus? Ho, all this deference pleases him, and he is kind and gracious in return, calls Breed, "my dear sir," in jest, and goes on that way. He mentions that he has forgotten his umbrella. Just as we were passing Breidablik, I thought of it, left my umbrella behind. Breed asks, "You'll be going over to our little store this evening, belike, for a drink?" Says Eliseus, "Aye, maybe, if 'twas only myself. But I've my father here." Breed makes himself pleasant, and goes on gossiping. "There's a fellow coming in day after tomorrow that's on his way to America." "Been home, d'you mean?" "Aye. He's from up in the village a bit. Been away for ever so many years, and home for the winter. His trunk's come down already by cart, and a mighty fine trunk. I've thought of going to America myself once or twice," says Eliseus frankly. "You?" cries Breed. "Why, there's little need for the likes of you going that way surely." "Well, 'twas not going over to stay forever I was thinking. But I've been traveling about so many places now, I might just as well make the trip over there." "Aye, of course, and why not? And a heap of money and means and all, so they say, in America. Here's this fellow I spoke of before. He's paid for more feasting and parties than's easy to count this winter past, and comes in here and says to me, 'Let's have some coffee, a potful, and all the cakes you've got.' Like to see his trunk?" They went out in the passage to look at the trunk. A wonder to look at on earth, flaming all sides and corners with metal and clasps and binding, and 3 flaps to hold it down, not to speak of a lock. "Burglar-proof," says Breed, as if he had tried it himself. They went back into the room, but Eliseus was grown thoughtful. This American from up in the village had outdone him. He was nothing beside such a man. Going out on journeys like any high official, natural enough that Breed should make a fuss of him. Eliseus ordered more coffee, and tried to play the rich man too, ordered cakes with his coffee and gave them to the dog, and all the time feeling worthless and dejected. What was his trunk beside that wonder out there? There it stood, black canvas with the corners all rubbed and worn, a handbag, nothing more. But wait. He would buy a trunk when he got to the towns, a splendid one it should be, only wait. "'Tis a pity to feed the dog so," says Breed. And Eliseus feels better at that, and ready to show off again. "'Tis a marvel how a beast can get so fat," says he. One thought leading to another, Eliseus breaks off his talk with Breed and goes out into the shed to look at the horse. And there he takes out a letter from his pocket and opens it. He had put it away at once, never troubling to look what money was in it. He had had letters of that sort from home before, and always a deal of notes inside, something to help him on the way. What was this? A big sheet of grey paper scrawled all over. "Little Rebecca to her brother Eliseus," and a few words from his mother. What else? Nothing else. No money at all. His mother wrote that she could not ask his father for more money again now, for there was none too much left of all they had got for the copper mine that time. The money had gone to buy storeboard, and pay for all the goods after, and Eliseus traveling about. He must try and manage by himself this time, for the money that was left would have to be kept for his brother and sisters, not to leave them all without. And a pleasant journey and your loving mother. No money. Eliseus himself had not enough for his fare. He had cleaned out the cash box at Storborg, and that was not much. Oh, but he had been a fool to send that money to the dealers in Bergen on account. No hurry for that, he might have let it stand over. He ought, of course, to have opened the letter before starting out at all. He might have saved himself that journey down to the village with his miserable trunk and all. And here he was. His father comes back from the smith's after settling his business there. Jensine was to go back with him next morning. And Jensine, look you, had been nowise contrary and hard to persuade, but saw at once they wanted help at Salanra for the summer, and was ready to come. A proper way to do, again. While his father is talking, Eliseus sits thinking of his own affairs. He shows him the American's trunk, and says, "Only wish I was where that's come from." And his father answers, "Aye, 'twas none so bad, maybe." Next morning Isak gets ready to start for home again. Has his food, puts in the horse and drives round by the smiths to fetch Jensine and her box. Eliseus stands looking after them as they go. Then when they are lost to sight in the woods, he pays his score at the lodging-house again, and something over. You can leave my trunk here till I come back, he tells Katrine, and off he goes. Eliseus, going where? Only one place to go, he turns back, going back home again. So he too takes the road up over the hills again, taking care to keep as near his father and Jensine as he can without being seen. Walks on and on. Beginning now to envy every soul of them in the wilds. 'Tis a pity about Eliseus, so changed he is and all. Is he doing no business at Storborg? Such as it is. Nothing to make a fortune out of there, and Eliseus is overmuch out and abroad, making pleasant journeys on business to open up connections, and it costs too much, he does not travel cheaply. Doesn't do to be mean, says Eliseus, and gives 20 or over where he might save 10. The business cannot support a man of his tastes, he must get subsidies from home. There's the farm at Storborg, with potatoes and corn and hay enough for the place itself, but all provisions else must come from Salanra. Is that all? Sivert must cart up his brother's goods from the steamer all for nothing. And is that all? His mother must get money out of his father to pay for his journeys. But is that all? The worst is to come. Eliseus manages his business like a fool. It flatters him to have folk coming up from the village to buy at Storborg, so that he gives them credit as soon as asked. And when this is noised abroad, there come still more of them to buy the same way. The whole thing is going to rack and ruin. Eliseus is an easy man, and lets it go. The store is emptied and the store is filled again. All costs money. And who pays it? His father. At first, his mother had been a faithful spokesman for him every way. Eliseus was the clever head of the family, they must help him on and give him a start, then think how cheaply he had got Storborg, and saying straight out what he would give for it. When his father thought it was going wrong somehow with the business, and naught but foolery, she took him up. How can you stand there and say such things? She reproved him for using such words about his son. Isak was forgetting his place, it seemed, to speak so of Eliseus. For look you, his mother had been out in the world herself. She understood how hard it was for Eliseus to live in the wilds, being used to better things, and accustomed to move in society, and with none of his equals near. He risked too much in his dealings with folk that were none of the soundest. But even so, 'twas not done with any evil intent on his part of ruining his parents, but sheer goodness of heart and noble nature. 'Twas his way to help those that were not so fine and grand as himself. Why, wasn't he the only man in those parts to use white handkerchiefs that were always having to be washed? When folk came trustingly to him and asked for credit, if he were to say, no, they might take it amiss, it might seem as if he were not the noble fellow they had thought, after all. Also, he had a certain duty towards his fellows, as the town-bred man, the genius among them all. His mother bore all these things in mind. But his father, never understanding it all in the least, opened her eyes and ears one day and said, "Look you here. Here's all that is left of the money from that mine." "That's all," said she. "And what's come of the rest?" "Eliseus, he's had the rest." And she clasped her hands at that and declared it was time Eliseus began to use his wits. Poor Eliseus, all set on end and frittered away. Better, maybe, if he'd worked on the land all the time, but now he's a man that has learned to write and use letters, no grip in him, no depth. For all that, no pitch-black devil of a man, not in love, not ambitious, hardly nothing at all is Eliseus, not even a bad thing of any great dimensions. Something unfortunate, ill-fated about this young man, as if something were rotting him from within. That engineer from the town, good man, better perhaps, if he had not discovered the lad in his youth and taken him up to make something out of him. The child had lost his root-hold, and suffered thereby. All that he turns to now leads back to something wanting in him, something dark against the light. Eliseus goes on and on. The two in the cart ahead pass by Storborg. Eliseus goes a long way round, and he too passes by. What was he to do there, at home, at his trading station and store? The two in the cart get to Salanra at nightfall. Eliseus is close at their heels. Sees Sivert come out in the yard, all surprised to see Jensine, and the two shake hands and laugh a little. Then Sivert takes the horse out and leads it to stable. Eliseus ventures forward, the pride of the family. He ventures up a little. Not walking up, but stealing up, he comes on Sivert in the stable. "'Tis only me," he says. "What, you two?" says Sivert, all astonished again. The two brothers begin talking quietly, about Sivert getting his mother to find some money. A last resource, the money for a journey. Things can't go on this way. Eliseus is weary of it, has been thinking of it a long time now, and he must go tonight. A long journey, to America, and start tonight. "America?" says Sivert out loud. "Sh. I've been thinking of it a long time, and you must get her to do as I say. It can't go on like this, and I've been thinking of going for ever so long." "But America," says Sivert. "No, don't you do it. I'm going. I've settled that. Going back now to catch the boat. But you must have something to eat." "I'm not hungry." "But rest a bit, then." "No." Sivert is trying to act for the best, and hold his brother back, but Eliseus is determined. For once he is determined. Sivert himself is all taken aback. First of all, it was a surprise to see Jensine again, and now here's Eliseus going to leave the place altogether, not to say the world. "What about Storborg?" says he. "What'll you do with it?" "Andresen can have it," says Sivert. "Andresen have it? How d'you mean? Isn't he going to have Leopoldine?" "Don't know about that." Perhaps he is." They talk quietly, keep on talking. Sivert thinks it would be best if his father came out and Eliseus could talk to him himself, but "No, no," whispers Eliseus again. He was never much of a man to face a thing like that, but always must have a go-between. Says Sivert, "Well, mother, you know how 'tis with her. There'll be no getting any way with her for crying and talking on. She mustn't know." "No," Eliseus agrees, "she mustn't know." Sivert goes off, stays away for ages, and comes back with money, a heap of money. "Here, that's all he has, think it'll be enough?" "Count," he didn't count how much there was. "What did he say, father?" "Nay, he didn't say much." "Now you must wait a little, and I'll get some more clothes on and go down with you." "'Tis not worth while, you go and lie down." "Ho, are you frightened of the dark that I mustn't go away?" says Sivert, trying a moment to be cheerful. He is away a moment, and comes back dressed, and with his father's food basket over his shoulder. As they go out, there is their father standing outside. "So you're going all that way, seems?" says Isak. "Aye," answered Eliseus, "but I'll be coming back again." "I'll not be keeping you now, there's little time," mumbles the old man, and turns away. "Good luck," he croaks out in a strange voice, and goes off all hurriedly. The two brothers walk down the road, a little way gone, they sit down to eat. Eliseus is hungry, can hardly eat enough. 'Tis a fine spring night, and the black grouse at play on the hilltops. The homely sound makes the emigrant lose courage for a moment. "'Tis a fine night," says he. "You better turn back now, Sivert," says he. Says Sivert, and goes on with him. They pass by Storborg, by Breidablik, and the sound follows them all the way from the hills here and there. 'Tis no military music like in the towns, nay, but voices, a proclamation, spring has come. Then suddenly the first chirp of a bird is heard from a treetop, waking others, and a calling and answering on every side. More than a song, it is a hymn of praise. The emigrant feels homesick already, maybe, something weak and helpless in him. He is going off to America, and none could be more fitted to go than he. "You turn back now, Sivert," says he. Well," says his brother. "If you'd rather." They sit down at the edge of the wood, and see the village just below them, the store and the quay, Brede's old lodging house. Some men are moving about by the steamer, getting ready. "Well, no time to stay sitting here," says Eliseus, getting up again. "Fancy you going all that way," says Sivert. And Eliseus answers, "But I'll be coming back again. And I'll have a better sort of trunk that journey." As they say goodbye, Sivert thrusts something into his brother's hand, a bit of something wrapped in paper. "What is it?" asks Eliseus. "Don't forget to write often," says Sivert. And so he goes. Eliseus opens the paper and looks. 'Tis the gold piece, 25 kroner in gold. "Here, don't," he calls out. "You mustn't do that." Sivert walks on. Walks on a little, then turns round and sits down again at the edge of the wood. More folk astir now down by the steamer, passengers going on board, Eliseus going on board. The boat pushes off from the side and rows away. And Eliseus is gone to America. He never came back. Chapter 12. A notable procession coming up to Salanra, something laughable to look at, maybe, but more than that. 3 men with enormous burdens, with sacks hanging down from their shoulders, front and back. Walking one behind the other, and calling to one another with jesting words, but heavily laden. Little Andresen, chief clerk, is head of that procession. Indeed, 'tis his procession. He has fitted out himself, and Sivert from Salanra, and one other, Frederick Strom from Breidablik, for the expedition. A notable little man is Andresen. His shoulder is weighed down slantwise on one side, and his jacket pulled all awry at the neck, the way he goes, but he carries his burden on and on. Storborg and the business Eliseus had left, well, not bought it straight out on the spot, perhaps, 'tis more than Andresen could afford. Better afford to wait a bit and get the whole maybe for nothing. Andresen is no fool, he has taken over the place on lease for the meanwhile, and manages the business himself. Gone through the stock in hand, and found a deal of unsaleable truck in Eliseus' store, even to such things as toothbrushes and embroidered table centers. Aye, and stuffed birds on springs that squeaked when you pressed in the right place. These are the things he has started out with now, going to sell them to the miners on the other side of the hills. He knows from Aronsson's time that miners with money in their pockets will buy anything on earth. Only a pity he had to leave behind 6 rocking horses that Eliseus had ordered on his last trip to Bergen. The caravan turns into the yard at Salanra and sets down its load. No long wait here. They drink a mug of milk, and make pretense of trying to sell their wares on the spot, then shoulder their burdens and off again. They are not out for pretense. Off they go, trundling southward through the forest. They march till noon, rest for a meal and on again till evening. Then they camp and make a fire, lie down, and sleep a while. Sivert sleeps resting on a boulder that he calls an armchair. Oh, Sivert knows what he is about. Here's the sun been warming that boulder all day, till it's a good place to sit and sleep. His companions are not so wise, and will not take advice. They lie down in the heather, and wake up feeling cold, and sneezing. Then they have breakfast and start off again. Listening now, for any sound of blasting about, they are hoping to come on the mine, and meet with folk sometime that day. The work should have got so far by now. A good way up from the water toward Salanra. But never a sound of blasting anywhere. They march till noon, meeting never a soul. But here and there they come upon holes in the ground, where men have been digging for trial. What can this mean? Means, no doubt, that the ore must be more than commonly rich at the farther end of the tract. They are getting out pure heavy copper, and keeping to that end all the time. In the afternoon they come upon several more mines, but no miners. They march on till evening, and already they can make out the sea below. Marching through a wilderness of deserted mines, and never a sound. 'Tis all beyond understanding, but nothing for it, they must camp and sleep out again that night. They talk the matter over. Can the work have stopped? Should they turn and go back again? Not a bit of it, says Anderson. Next morning a man walks into their camp, a pale, haggard man who looks at them frowningly, piercingly. That you, Anderson? Says the man. It is Aronson, Aronson the trader. He does not say no to a cup of hot coffee and something to eat with the caravan, and settles down at once. I saw the smoke of your fire, and came up to see what it was, says he. I said to myself, sure enough, they're coming to their senses, and starting work again. And 'twas only you, after all. Were you making for, then? Here. What's that you've got with you? Goods. Goods, cries Aronson. Coming up here with goods for sale? Who's to buy them? There's never a soul. They left last Saturday gone. Left? Who left? All the lot. Not a soul on the place now. And I've goods enough myself, anyway. A whole store packed full. I'll sell you anything you like. Oh, Trader Aronson in difficulties again. The mine has shut down. They ply him with coffee till he grows calmer, and asks what it all means. Aronson shakes his head despairingly. 'Tis beyond understanding, there's no words for it, says he. All had been going so well, and he had been selling goods, and money pouring in. The village round all flourishing, and using the finest meal, and a new schoolhouse, and hanging lamps and town-made boots, and all. Then suddenly their lordships up at the mine take it into their heads that the thing isn't paying, and close down. Not paying? But it paid them before? Wasn't there clean copper there and plain to see at every blasting? 'Twas rank cheating, no less. And never a thought of what it means to a man like me. I doubt it's as they say. 'Tis that Geisler's at the bottom of it all, same as before. No sooner he'd come up than the work stopped, 'twas as if he'd smelt it out somehow. Geisler, is he here, then? Is he not? Ought to be shot, he ought. Comes up one day by the steamer and says to the engineer, well, how's things going? All right, as far as I can see, says the engineer. But Geisler he just stands there, and asks again, ho, all right, is it? Aye, as far as I know, says the engineer. But as true as I'm here, no sooner the post comes up from that same boat Geisler had come by, than there's letter and telegram both to the engineer that the work wasn't paying. And he's to shut down at once. The members of the expedition look at one another, but the leader, Anderson himself, has not lost courage yet. You may just as well turn back and go home again, is Aronson's advice. We're not doing that, says Anderson, and packs up the coffee pot. Aronson stares at the three of them in turn. You're mad, then, says he. Look you, Anderson he cares little now for what his master that was can say, he's master himself now, leader of an expedition equipped at his own expense for a journey to distant parts. 'Twould lose him his prestige to turn back now where he is. Well, where will you go? Asks Aronson irritably. Can't say, answers Anderson. But he's a notion of his own all the same, no doubt. Thinking, maybe, of the natives, and coming down into the district 3 men strong, with glass beads and finger rings. We'll be getting on, says he to the rest. Now, Aronson had thought like enough to go farther up that morning, seeing he'd come so far, wanting, maybe, to see if all the place was quite deserted. If it could be true every man on the place was gone. But seeing these peddler folk so set on going on, it hinders him, and he tells them again and again they're mad to try. Aronson is furious himself, marches down in front of the caravan, turning round and shouting at them, barking at them, trying to keep them out of his district. And so they come down to the huts in the mining center. A little town of huts, but empty and desolate. Most of the tools and implements are housed under cover, but poles and planks, broken carts and cases and barrels, lie all about in disorder. Here and there a notice on a door declares, "No admittance." "There you are," cries Aronson. "What did I say? Not a soul in the place." And he threatens the caravan with disaster. He will send for the lensman. Anyway, he's going to follow them every step now, and if he can catch them at any unlawful trading, 'tis penal servitude and slavery, no mistake. All at once somebody calls out for Sivert. The place is not altogether dead, after all, not utterly deserted. Here is a man standing beckoning at the corner of a house. Sivert trundles over with his load, and sees at once who it is, Geisler. "Funny meeting you here," says Geisler. His face is red and flourishing, but his eyes apparently cannot stand the glare of spring. He is wearing smoked glasses. He talks as brilliantly as ever. "Luckiest thing in the world," says he. "Save me going all the way up to Salanra, and I've a deal to look after. How many settlers are there in the Almaning now?" 10. 10 new holdings. "I'll agree. I'm satisfied. But 'tis 230,000 men of your father's stamp the country wants." "Aye, that's what I say, and I mean it. I've reckoned it out." "Sivert, are you coming on? The caravan is waiting." Geisler hears, and calls back sharply, "No." "I'll come on after," calls Sivert, and sets down his load. The two men sit down and talk. Geisler is in the right mood today, the spirit moves him, and he talks all the time, only pausing when Sivert puts in a word or so in answer, and then going on again. "A mighty lucky thing, can't help saying it. Everything turned out just as I wanted all the way up, and now meeting you here and saving all the journey to Salanra. All well at home, what?" "All well, and thank you kindly." "Got up that hayloft yet, over the cowshed?" "Aye, 'tis done." Well, I've a heap of things to look to, almost more than I can manage. Look at where we're sitting now, for instance. What d'you say to that, Sivert man? Ruined city, eh? Men gone about to build it all against their nature and well-being. Properly speaking, it's all my fault from the start, that is to say, I'm a humble agent in the workings of fate. It all began when your father picked up some bits of stone up in the hills, and gave you to play with when you were a child. That was how it started. I knew well enough those bits of stone were worth exactly as much as men would give for them, no more. Well and good, I set a price on them myself, and bought them. Then the stones passed from hand to hand, and did no end of damage. Time went on. And now, a few days ago, I came up here again, and what for, d'you think? To buy those stones back again." Geisler stops for a moment, and looks at Sivert. Then suddenly he glances at the sack, and asks, "What's that you're carrying?" "Goods," says Sivert. "We're taking them down to the village." Geisler does not seem interested in the answer, has not even heard it, like as not. He goes on. "Buy them back again, yes. Last time, I let my son manage the deal. He sold them then. Young fellow about your own age, that's all about him. He's the lightning in the family, I'm more a sort of fog. Know what's the right thing to do, but don't do it. But he's the lightning, and he's entered the service of industry for the time being. 'Twas he sold for me last time. I'm something and he's not, he's only the lightning, quick to act, modern type. But the lightning by itself's a barren thing. Look at you folk at Salanra, now, looking up at blue peaks every day of your lives. No newfangled inventions about that, but feel and rocky peaks, rooted deep in the past, but you've them for companionship. There you are, living in touch with heaven and earth, one with them, one with all these wide, deep-rooted things. No need of a sword in your hands, you go through life bareheaded, barehanded, in the midst of a great kindliness. Look, nature's there, for you and yours to have and enjoy. Man and nature don't bombard each other, but agree, they don't compete, race one against the other, but go together. There's you Salanra folk, in all this, living there. Field and forest, moors and meadow, and sky and stars, oh, 'tis not poor and sparingly counted out, but without measure. Listen to me, Sivert, you be content. You've everything to live on, everything to live for, everything to believe in, being born and bringing forth, you are the needful on earth. 'Tis not all that are so, but you are so needful on earth. 'Tis you that maintain life. Generation to generation, breeding ever anew, and when you die, the new stock goes on. That's the meaning of eternal life. What do you get out of it? An existence innocently and properly set towards all. What you get out of it? Nothing can put you under orders and lord it over you Salanra folk, you've peace and authority and this great kindliness all round. That's what you get for it. You lie at a mother's breast and suck, and play with a mother's warm hand. There's your father now, he's one of the 32,000. What's to be said of many another? I'm something, I'm the fog, as it were, here and there, floating around, sometimes coming like rain on dry ground. But the others? There's my son, the lightning that's nothing in itself, a flash of barrenness, he can act. My son, he's the modern type, a man of our time. He believes honestly enough all the age has taught him, all the Jew and the Yankee have taught him, I shake my head at it all. But there's nothing mythical about me. 'Tis only in the family, so to speak, that I'm like a fog. Sit there shaking my head. Tell the truth, I've not the power of doing things and not regretting it. If I had, I could be lightning myself. Now I'm a fog. Suddenly Geisler seems to recollect himself and asks, got up that hayloft yet, above the cowshed? Aye, that's done. And father's put up a new house. New house? 'Tis in case anyone should come, he says, in case Geisler he should happen to come along. Geisler thinks over this, and takes his decision, well, then, I'd better come. Yes, I'll come. You can tell your father that. But I've a heap of things to look to. Came up here and told the engineer to let his people in Sweden know I was ready to buy. And we'd see what happened. All the same to me, no hurry. You ought to have seen that engineer, here he's been going about and keeping it all up with men and horses and money and machines and any amount of fuss. Thought it was all right, knew no better. The more bits of stone he can turn into money, the better. He thinks he's doing something clever and deserving, bringing money to the place, to the country, and everything nearing disaster more and more, and he's none the wiser. 'Tis not money the country wants, there's more than enough of it already, 'tis men like your father there's not enough of. Aye, turning the means to an end in itself and being proud of it. They're mad, diseased, they don't work, they know nothing of the plough, only the dice. Mighty deserving of them, isn't it, working and wasting themselves to nothing in their own mad way. Look at them, staking everything, aren't they? There's but this much wrong with it all, they forget that gambling isn't courage, 'tis not even foolhardy courage, 'tis a horror. D'you know what gambling is? 'Tis fear, with the sweat on your brow, that's what it is. What's wrong with them is, they won't keep pace with life, but want to go faster, race on, tear on ahead, driving themselves into life itself like wedges. And then the flanks of them say, here, stop, there's something breaking, find a remedy, stop, say the flanks. And then life crushes them, politely but firmly crushes them. And then they set to complaining about life, raging against life. Each to his own taste, some may have ground to complain, others not, but there's none should rage against life. Not be stern and strict and just with life, but be merciful to it, and take its part, only think of the gambler's life has to bear with. Geisler recollects himself again, and says, well, all that's as it may be, leave it. He is evidently tired, beginning to breathe in little gasps. Going down, says he. Aye. There's no hurry. You owe me a long walk over the hills, Sivert man, remember that? I remember it all. I remember from the time I was 1.5 years. Stood leaning down from the barn bridge at Garmo, and noticed a smell. I can smell it again now. But all that's as it may be, that too. But we might have done that trip over the hills now if you hadn't got that sack. What's in it? Goods. 'Tis Anderson is going to sell them. Well, then, I'm a man that knows what's the right thing to do, but doesn't do it, says Geisler. I'm the fog. Now perhaps I'll buy that mine back again one of these days, it's not impossible. But if I do, it wouldn't be to go about staring up at the sky and saying, aerial railway. South America. No, leave that to the gamblers. Folk hereabouts say I must be the devil himself because I knew beforehand this was going to break up. But there's nothing mystical about me, 'tis simple enough. The new copper mines in Montana, that's all. The Yankees are smarter than we are at that game, they are cutting us to death in South America, our ore here's too poor. My son's the lightning. He got the news, and I came floating up here. Simple, isn't it? I beat those fellows in Sweden by a few hours, that's all. Geisler is short of breath again. He gets on his feet and says, if you're going down, let's get along. They go on down together, Geisler dragging behind, all tired out. The caravan has stopped at the quay, and Frederick Strom, cheerful as ever, is poking fun at Aronson. I'm clean out of tobacco, got any tobacco, what? I'll give you tobacco, said Aronson threateningly. Frederick laughs, and says comfortingly, nay, you've no call to take it all heavy-like and sad, Aronson. We're just going to sell these things here before your eyes, and then we'll be off home again. Get away and wash your dirty mouth, says Aronson furiously. Ha ha ha. Nay, you've no call to dance about that way, keep still and look like a picture. Geisler is tired out, even his smoked glasses do not help him now, his eyes keep closing in the glare. Goodbye, Sivert man, says he all at once. No, I can't get up to Salanra this time, after all, tell your father. I've a heap of things to see to. But I'll come later on, say that. Aronson spits after him, and says, ought to be shot. For 3 days the caravan peddles its wares, selling out the contents of the sacks, and getting good prices. It was a brilliant piece of business. The village folk were still well supplied with money after the downfall of the mine, and were excellently in form in the way of spending. Those stuffed birds on springs were the very thing they wanted. They set them up on chests of drawers in their parlors, and also bought nice paper knives, the very thing for cutting the leaves of an almanac. Aronson was furious. Just as if I hadn't things every bit as good in my store, said he. Trader Aronson was in a sorry way. He had made up his mind to keep with these peddlers and their sacks, watching them all the time. But they went separate ways about the village, each for himself, and Aronson almost tore himself to pieces trying to follow all at once. First he gave up Frederick Strom, who was quickest at saying unpleasant things, then Sivert, because he never said a word, but went on selling. At last he stuck to following his former clerk, and trying to set folk against him wherever he went in. Oh, but Anderson knew his master that was, knew him of old, and how little he knew of business and unlawful trading. Ho, you mean to say English thread's not prohibited? Said Aronson, looking wise. I know it is, answered Anderson. But I'm not carrying any this way, I can sell that elsewhere. I haven't a reel in my pack, look for yourself, if you like. That's as it may be, says Aronson. Anyway, I know what's forbidden, and I've shown you, so don't try to teach me. Aronson stood it for a whole day, then he gave up Anderson, too, and went home. The peddlers had no one to watch them after that. And then things began to go swimmingly. It was in the day when womenfolk used to wear loose plaits in their hair. And Anderson, he was the man to sell loose plaits. Aye, at a pinch he could sell fair plaits to dark girls, and be sorry he'd nothing lighter. No grey plates, for instance, for that was the finest of all. And every evening the 3 young salesmen met at an appointed place and went over the day's trade, each borrowing from another anything he'd sold out of. And Anderson would sit down, often as not, and take out a file and file away the German trademark from a sportsman's whistle, or rub out Faber on the pens and pencils. Andresen was a trump, and always had been. Sivert, on the other hand, was rather a disappointment. Not that he was any way slack, and failed to sell his goods, 'twas he, indeed, sold most, but he did not get enough for them. "You don't put in enough patter with it," said Andresen. No, Sivert was no hand at reeling off a lot of talk. He was a field worker, sure of what he said, and speaking calmly when he spoke at all. What was there to talk about here? Also, Sivert was anxious to be done with it and get back home. There was work to do in the fields. "'Tis that Jensen's calling him," Frederick Strom explained. Frederick, himself, by the way, had work on his own fields to be done that spring, and little time to waste, but for all that, he must look in on Aronson the last day and get up an argument with him. "I'll sell him the empty sacks," said he. Andresen and Sivert stayed outside while he went in. They heard grand goings-on inside the store, both talking at once, and Frederick setting up a laugh now and again. Then Aronson threw open the door and showed his visitor out. Oh, but Frederick didn't come out, no, he took his time, and talked a lot more. The last thing they heard from outside was Frederick trying to sell Aronson a lot of rocking horses. Then the caravan went home again, 3 young men full of life and health. They marched and sang, slept a few hours in the open, and went on again. When they got back to Salanra on the Monday, Isak had begun sowing. The weather was right for it. The air moist, with the sun peeping out now and again, and a mighty rainbow strung right across the heavens. The caravan broke up, farvel, farvel. Isak at his sowing. A stump of a man, a barge of a man to look at, nothing more. Clad in homespun, wool from his own sheep, boots from the hide of his own cows and calves. Sowing, and he walks religiously bareheaded to that work. His head is bald just at the very top, but all the rest of him shamefully hairy. A fan, a wheel of hair and beard, stands out from his face. 'Tis Isak, the Margrave. 'Twas rarely he knew the day of the month. What need had he of that? He had no bills to be met on a certain date. The marks on his almanac were to show the time when each of the cows should bear. But he knew St. Olaf's day in the autumn, that by then his hay must be in, and he knew Candlemas in spring, and that 3 weeks after then the bears came out of their winter quarters. All seed must be in the earth by then. He knew what was needful. A tiller of the ground, body and soul, a worker on the land without respite. A ghost risen out of the past to point the future, a man from the earliest days of cultivation, a settler in the wilds, 900 years old, and, withal, a man of the day. Nay, there was nothing left to him now of the copper mine and its riches. The money had vanished into air. And who had anything left of all that wealth when the working stopped, and the hills lay dead and deserted? But the almaning was there still, and 10 new holdings on that land, beckoning 100 more. Nothing growing there? All things growing there, men and beasts and fruit of the soil. Isak sowing his corn. The evening sunlight falls on the corn that flashes out in an arc from his hand, and falls like a dropping of gold to the ground. Here comes Sivert to the harrowing. After that the roller, and then the harrow again. Forest and field look on. All is majesty and power, a sequence and purpose of things. Cling, eeling, say the cow bells far up on the hillside, coming nearer and nearer. The cattle are coming home for the night. 15 head of them, and 45 sheep and goats besides. 70 in all. There go the women out with their milk pails, carried on yokes from the shoulder, Leopoldine, Jensine, and little Rebecca. All 3 barefooted. The Margravine, Inger herself, is not with them, she is indoors preparing the meal. Tall and stately, as she moves about her house, a vestal tending the fire of a kitchen stove. Inger has made her stormy voyage, 'tis true, has lived in a city a while, but now she is home. The world is wide, swarming with tiny specks. Inger has been one of them. All but nothing in all humanity, only one speck. Then comes the evening.